3 points, good vibes. Norwich City are off and running in the Championship. Welcome to this week's edition of the PinkUn Norwich City Podcast. I'm Connor Southwell, joined by Coventry's finest, Paddy, Davitt, to reflect on a win in his home city. Paddy, it was a good afternoon for Norwich City, wasn't it? I know you saw plenty of familiar faces in the home end at the CBS yesterday, but as football goes, from a yellow and green perspective, first and foremost, Norwich City, Johannes Hoff Thorup will be very pleased with the events that unfolded yesterday afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely, Connor. And when we got into this after the game with him, you take Oxford out of the equation now, and Lord alive, we'd all like to take Oxford out of the equation because that was bad. That was bad as a performance, bad result on the day. But that aside, and we don't even need to get into the sort of Johnny Rose circus it was around that game. But you take that out now, and it's effectively 2 home draws and that a very good win against a team who really do feel they'll be in and around it in that top 6 conversation. And really, one of those 2 draws was up until 87 minutes looking like a win, the home one against Blackburn. So 5 points from the last 3 games, and a sense that, things are coming together now. We've seen all through these 4 league games, and you can throw in maybe the 2 cup ties as well in the League Cup, elements of, we can see what Thorup ball looks like, maybe feels like, but rough around the edges and weighed down by some really poor defensive concessions and not a clinical enough edge at the other end of the pitch. So I guess the jury has to remain out when you're seeing that evidence. But what we saw on Saturday at the CBS, I think, was clinical enough that when it mattered, they could make it make a breakthrough, and then clinical at the other end of the pitch. I think I can only recall Gunny having to kick 1 shot away at his near post in that second half. So first league win, first league clean sheet really tells you that is progress. And we'll get into the weeds of maybe Coventry. I don't think were particularly good in that second half, but maybe that was a result of what Norwich did in terms of nullifying them and doing a number on them. And it was just really pleasing to see that, particularly as we're now going into a 2-week break, if they don't get the result yesterday, I know Johannes was very keen to play down this, we haven't got a win yet, but that will come. But if it hadn't come yesterday, there's just more sense of, how long will this take? How patient the Norwich fans have to be? Well, there's your answer. There is yesterday a performance, individuals within that performance, and a result which you can really bite down on and feel that, Norwich can go anywhere in this division, get a result. If they can replicate that at Carrow Road, then who knows where that momentum can take them and where we are come Christmas, when it starts to heat up. But it was good. It was good. And it was good for Johannes himself and Glenn, because they would. And I think we got a sense of that post match that while he was playing it down before the game, you could see the celebrations at the final whistle with the coaching staff, the supporters, the players on the pitch. That is a big moment. Your first win as Norwich manager, your first league win as Norwich manager is a big moment. And it'll just, not that they probably needed it internally, but it just gives everyone a boost. And they've got 2 weeks now at Colney to really, particularly with the newer players, to really embed them into what they're trying to build. And, Swansea, the other side now, I personally can't wait for that because, what we saw yesterday is still very much experimental, still very much exploratory. And it was good enough to go to a very good Coventry side at this level and get the result. So you have to be hugely encouraged by what you saw, really. And, it feels like there's so much more to come as well. We've only really got started with this head coach and what he's trying to do. And as a result, I think if you're you boys are Norwich fans, I'm not, as you pointed out, Connor, but if I'm a Norwich fan at this stage, I'm feeling quietly confident and quietly optimistic about what this season might hold from here now, particularly with the whole circus of the transfer window behind us. And let's see what Johannes can do on the coaching field with this group of players for the next 2 months. And if that can translate into more of what we saw at Coventry, which is winning football, defensively sound, very good in possession, and creating enough chances that you think over the entirety, with a player like Josh Sargent at the top end of the pitch, they will convert their fair proportion. So all the elements are there. And maybe for the first time at Coventry, they came together all on the same page, rather than pieces of the jigsaw, but other pieces that you don't really want to be seeing and won't get you results, get you performances at this level. I think yesterday probably was the first time it all came together, and hopefully that's just the start.
And before we go any further, Paddy, can you just, because people watching will see you sitting in a car, so can you just explain the circumstances that's led you to be sitting in what I presume is a passenger seat in your car in around Coventry somewhere?
I'm in the leafy Warwickshire countryside, Connor. Yeah, basically, I won't bore the listeners, stroke viewers, but I came over with you boys yesterday. Family came over later. Obviously, all my family are from here anyway, sisters and extended family and dad and what have you. So yeah, I'm gonna have a few days, bit like the international break, and players maybe getting a few days off at Colney. I'm gonna have a few days here in the leafy Warwickshire countryside. But as we record this is Sunday lunchtime. It's right in the middle of a 4-year-old's lunch, and if I was anywhere inside a house at the minute, then there's no telling what this broadcast would do. I mean, we don't exactly tip up to the quality end of the spectrum anyway, but it would completely go south at a rate of knots if we had a screaming 4-year-old who isn't getting octonauts or something like that. So I thought let's play it safe. Let's retreat to my car. So and we're actually. I won't turn the camera around, but we're actually on a farm, believe it or not, because again, I thought with a 4-year-old and a 4-month-old, we can keep them occupied. We've been for a nice walk round this morning. There's horses, there's chickens, there's goats.
I was going to say, what animals have you got on said
there
farm?
you go.
Sounds like
But
quite an array.
but all of that is completely immaterial or pales into insignificance. With directly in front of me is a red Massey Ferguson tractor, which he's already been apparently he's already he went on an earlier walk with his mother, managed to find the farmer who's basically, I think, probably had the thumb screws put on him, and he's been allowed to sit on the tractor. So he is in clover at the minute as he tucks into his lunch. But so that's a long-winded. I thought you were going to go down the route of something to do with glasses, Connor, but you stay clear of that. Sunglasses.
No, I wasn't. I was going to save that for later, actually. But
Right, fair enough.
But there we go. And we've been joined by Seaman. Sam, welcome and thanks for joining us. We began by talking about the win and the quality of the win, but I want to zoom out even a little bit further because as you may or may not have heard Paddy mapping out there. Yes, draw against Blackburn, and I think we can park that to an extent, but. Now looking at the last 2 games, point against Sheffield United, who came down from the Premier League, 3 points against the Coventry side, who've been tipped by many for, if not top 6, then maybe even top 2 contenders this season. As a haul of points, and I know results and whatnot at this stage of the season aren't the be-all and end-all, but just taking that as a 2-game block, I think there's a lot of encouragement there, both from in terms of their performance, but equally in terms of the outcome that they've achieved in those 2 games.
Yeah, I think that win was important for the morale as well, and the feeling that they are actually getting somewhere tangibly. As I think Thorup probably was more willing to admit yesterday after the result than he was going into it. But yeah, also obviously it's about points on the board. It's not all just about performances and moving in the right direction, because ultimately, and I know this does feel like a very unlikely possibility, but Norwich could play amazingly, get no wins throughout the season and end up going down to League One. And then it's a completely different proposition for the future. So yeah, I think to have those points on the board is important. They're already sort of tracking with where a lot of people expected them to be come the end of the season, in that sort of mid-table bracket. And they have managed to knock out, as you said, 2 pretty difficult games against 2 teams who will hope to be and will feel they can be in and around that promotion mix towards the end of the season. So I think they've proven that they can do that. Thorup has spoken about the fact that you need some wins to bring fans along and to maybe extend that patience that there has been from those supporters. I think if they had 2 weeks now to ruminate on another failure to win, another, even a late equaliser from Coventry, as they were pushing for late in that game, then although there still would have been the underlying positivity and the desire to look at positives and the progress that Norwich have made, the sort of changes in style of play and things like that, I think there still would have been this level of subtle anxiety about when is this going to turn into results. But I thought we saw Norwich put almost all of it together yesterday. And yeah, it was really encouraging for the second week in a row against a team who everyone expects, I think, will be in and around that playoff mix by the end of the season.
Yeah, and all of this, Paddy, just feeds into what I'm sensing. And again, Sam, I'm sure you had this speaking to fans who were coming out of the away end yesterday, and you pick it up, be it you gauge your temperature online, be it you speak to people in the flesh, be it however you decide to take your fan mood. But the for want of a better phrase, the good vibes around the place at the moment, coming out of that fan base. And I think a lot of it is or shows just how much early buy-in Johannes Hoff Thorup has achieved so far, and of course other people around him, Ben Napper, this squad of players, his coaching team. But there is at least, even amid what had been before yesterday a winless start to the campaign. Even we were all at Selhurst Park the other night. The amount of the 1,700 supporters who remained in that away end to the end, serenading that group of players after they've been beaten 4-0, by the way. But there was a lot of encouragement and a lot of green shoots in that performances. And I think a lot of this speaks to maybe, we could have a big, long, deep discussion about this, but to really sort of hone in on it, I think a lot of it is over the last 3 years, and we've had conversations on this podcast pretty endlessly about it, the lack of substance that's maybe been behind the results in the last 3 years, the short-termism at the club, particularly when you go back to last summer, the recruitment of players who maybe felt like they were probably on their way down rather than at the moment where it feels like they were on the way up. You're watching players who, yes, are making mistakes, but they're making mistakes with people looking at them and supporters looking at them with the knowledge that it's part of a journey, it's part of their improvement process rather than probably being their limit and being bound by those limits. So it feels like a lot of good vibes, which isn't just from the win yesterday, but is probably from the deeper direction that the club is heading in at the moment. I think it's been really a significant period of time, Paddy, that there has been, and again, still very early days, and of course it always gets amplified after a win, but just to encapsulate, even amid the turmoil and the turbulence of the transfer window and different players doing different things over the summer, it does feel like he's got the fan base on side already at this early stage. And a lot of that as well is through his communications and just how good he is at sending those messages and communicating, and probably his honesty as well, as was documented in one of his answers to your questions yesterday.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's the whole thing. I pretty much agree with everything you said there, Connor. But what we have, I feel, is a definitive break from what was probably, let's be honest, from Farke's dismissal onwards. This sense that it was short term. It was. I'm sure it wasn't internally. They would push back on it, but it was almost, knee jerk and making decisions with not maybe that strategical aim that drove the first part of the Webber-Farke experiment and brought those 2 title wins. And of course, you have to reference them. Dean Smith and David Wagner in their own way. 2 very different coaches to a Thorup, 2 very different outlooks. In terms of how they want to play and how they see the game and how they communicate it. I mean, Wagner on that front, you couldn't fault him really. But even then, I mean, you may have to go back to the furore of that night against Watford down here, which wasn't all that many months from the end of last season, where there was a rupture almost, and it wasn't restricted to 1 or 2 in the snake pit. It was palpable frustration with that head coach and the perception around his decisions and how he was putting a team on the pitch and the brand of football. So it is. I think it is that sense for me now that, and you referenced Napper, you referenced Thorup, but it's also what's happening in the boardroom as well, where there's now clearly a pathway to Delia and Michael passing the baton on to Mark Attanasio, Norfolk Holdings. By this time, certainly next year, that will be very firmly now in their control. If the hurdles in between now and then, which were mapped out recently, are all cleared, which there's no sense that won't be the case. So from top to bottom now, it's a sense of, right, well, this there's no fan, wherever you sit in terms of glass half full, glass half empty, could say that this is a club treading water now. This is very much a club trying to reset and trying to do things better than they have done in the last 2 or 3 seasons, do things differently, try and be innovative. We saw that in the recruitment this summer. It wasn't, and you loathe to throw names in to underline the point, but it wasn't Barnes, it wasn't Duffy, it wasn't, Danny Bart and Huang. It wasn't that type of recruitment. It was Bulgarian recruitment with Cordoba. It was a player like Amankwa Forson. It was players like Swartow and now more recently Slimani. Really a sense that they're looking underneath stones and looking in leagues that maybe other clubs aren't doing, which was what characterised the very good parts of the first twist of the Webber-Farke cycle. So, but that's all very good. That's theoretically very good, and philosophically in terms of the playing style, very good. But you need to have results. You need to produce results, and that's why yesterday was more of an affirmation that we're telling you this, we want to do this, it involves young players, this is going to require a little bit of patience, it won't be the finished article. That's all well and good, but they're sound bites. You need tangible evidence if you're a Norwich fan, whether you're in the away end at Coventry or whether you've been turning up at Carrow Road in these last 2 home games, that, okay, I'll buy in, and I understand it could take time and nobody knows how long and how swiftly it will come together and how cohesive it will be. And also maybe, as we underlined with our pre-season predictions pod, what that might translate into this season in terms of finishing position, that's all to be decided. But you can't really come away from these last 3 league games particularly and not feel that, yeah, everything this guy is saying, everything that Napa has done in the window, maybe everything that's happening in the boardroom, because we know how hands-on Atanasio has been in this last recruitment cycle, but mainly in the last 18 months he's been involved and on the board level. All of that we see on the pitch at Coventry. You see the impact of Slimani. You see, Schwarzer when he comes on. You see the style of play. You see Callum Doyle, what an unbelievable piece of loan business that is shaping up to be. So it's all coming together under a head coach who, and you saw the answer he gave yesterday to why did he hook Forson and Cernach. I'm sure there's a lot of managers, a lot of recent Norwich managers wouldn't have come out and been as brutally honest as that for fear of upsetting a player and how that would play in the changing room. This guy is different. He's cut differently. Maybe that's his youth. Maybe that's his freshness in terms of his senior coaching journey. But if I'm a fan and I'm hearing that, I'm thinking that is brutally honest, and I want more of that. I want my footballing figurehead to operate in that manner and to be, unflinchingly candid and transparent. And there's obviously things he won't be able to go into at various points, but if he's saying that externally, you can be sure he's sitting down, and as he did, and as he said in that answer, Forson and Cernach at half-time and at full-time were told directly, not good enough, need to improve. And, if that is a seam that's running through where we are now with Norwich as a football club, then you can only be happy, because it's about raising standards and not settling for, treading water, but actually aspiring to be better than Championship. They want to be a Premier League club. They want to be a sustainable Premier League club. And from top to bottom now, that is the mission. And that's what's being driven forward by Atanasio, his people, Napa, his people, Thorup and his people. And as long as they're all on the same page, they're aligned, there's that synergy in terms of outlook, then it's hard to see how Norwich fail, really. But what success looks like, is it another crack at the Premier League and they come back down? Who knows? That's for the future. But in the here and now, you cannot feel anything other than this is different, and this is radically different in many respects from what we've had in the last 2 or 3 seasons, which, to go back to my initial point, a fan base who felt, rightly or wrongly, in large swathes, disconnected from what was happening. That's not really my club. I don't like what I'm seeing. I don't like the style of football. I don't really like what's happening off the field. I don't like the lack of messaging, the poor communication, all those elements. Of course, club officials who were there at that point and are there now would categorically say that wasn't the case, and maybe we amped that up, a lot of that, but that was a feeling amongst large proportions of the fan base that, even to the point where you had season ticket holders with season tickets, I can't be bothered to go today, which wasn't an isolated. I had lots of fans who told me that in recent seasons. I can guarantee you now they cannot wait to get to Carrow Road for 3:00 on a Saturday to watch this team play under this head coach.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think even when you speak about last season, and I have spoken about last season with people, and it was like, yeah, it was a success, and it was. Norwich finished 6th. They were in the playoffs. In terms of objective, they met it. Irrespective of then, of course, we can dissect and speak about how they dealt with the playoffs when they came around. But the fact they got there, particularly from the position that they were in, it was an incredible success. It was an incredible story, really, and I think it would be hard to assess, particularly David Wagner and the job that he did in that season, as anything other than pretty good, if not remarkable from the position. Okay, he got them into that position in the first place, but not many managers then get clubs out of it. But I think, and I can only speak on an individual basis, and I'm sure there'll be, as Paddy mapped out, lots of fans that maybe agree and maybe lots of fans who feel differently. And of course, everyone is entitled to feel how they like at any respective point. But for me, and it's been a really difficult thing to try and quantify, but there was just something that didn't quite sit right, that didn't quite feel right, that probably prevented that level of buy-in. I didn't really, again, personal choice, it wasn't really the style of play that I like to watch as a football fan, and it's like packet of crisps, isn't it? Everyone has a different flavour and everyone likes to watch a different style of play. It wasn't really what particularly resonated with me, but equally I think it was about wider than that. Sam. It was about strategy and outlook, and you compare it this time last year, Norwich had 11 30-year-olds in their squad. This time they've not signed a player over 23. That's a really drastic change, and it does feel like, in terms of strategy, style of play, that alignment that Paddy spoke about in all areas, that there is a lot more encouragement, and Paddy encapsulated it quite well at the end. There's now an excitement about going to watch Norwich City for all of those different reasons, and I think that's incredibly impressive. Just how quickly, win, lose, and draw, because Norwich have done it all this season, and both of you guys are right. You absolutely have to get results along the way, and Johannes has said that as well. But to achieve kind of this feeling, and look, they could lose 5 on the bounce, and all of it could be redundant in a few months. But at this point in time, particularly given that opening day against Oxford, given Gabriel Sara left, Johnny Rowe left, Adam Eder, of course, although he wasn't involved in the back end of the season, Abu Kamara as well, a bright young thing. Given that they all left in the circumstances in which they did leave, at this point in time, to have the feeling that they've got at the moment, it's incredibly impressive how quickly they've managed to pull that all together.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, although probably there was a lot of confidence among fans and commentators that this would be where Norwich ended up, and I think everyone saw the positive signs. The one element of surprise I've been hearing over the last few days and the last few weeks with those performances improving has been the pace at which Norwich have been able to do that. And I think when you look at that previous Daniel Farke season, and a lot of parallels have been drawn with that, because I think realistically there aren't many examples of that ever happening in Norwich's history, where they look at it as a real long-term project and don't focus too much on the short term. So a lot of parallels were drawn with that, and I think everyone expected that it would take a similar time frame. Obviously, there are different reasons why that might have been a more difficult position for Norwich to be in compared to what it is now. But I think when you look at the change that there is already in the performances from where they were last season, sort of tactically, in terms of the vibes that you mentioned earlier as well, how the fans are feeling, how it feels Thorup is interacting with players as well. It feels like there's been such a vast change in such a short period of time. And I think Thorup deserves a lot of credit for that, because Ben Napper is in charge of the mid to long term, realistically, and he's in charge of maybe those bigger decisions and the recruitment. But Thorup is there to progress things in the short term, to make sure week to week Norwich are doing the best possible thing to improve their levels of performance. And he's managed to take them from a place earlier in the summer. And I think anyone who saw the pre-season games and then the same themes carrying on into Oxford will know it wasn't great, and it didn't look perfect when Thorup took over. So for them, in a matter of weeks, to go from there to where they are now is excellent. And I think it's not as simple as many people thought, even disregarding the time frame. Not every single project where the optics look good ends up doing well. Plymouth thought they were making a really intelligent appointment when they appointed Ian Foster last season and picking someone out who maybe other teams wouldn't go for, and that didn't work out for them whatsoever. I think everyone assumed that because Norwich do things in that slightly different way, and they go and get a Danish head coach, they sign a load of young players who maybe people weren't aware of before this summer. Everyone assumes, oh, well, that's the clever way of doing things. That always works out. It will work out for Norwich. But it requires some really good execution from those players who have come in, and from Thorup to get things working. And as you said, I think just to be able to take things to where they are in a couple of months, I think is excellent work from Thorup. Now the task is for him to turn that into a consistent thing, because we can talk all we like about the product that they've produced yesterday. And yes, that is probably close to where Norwich want to be in the long term. But realistically, they have still only got 5 points from their first 4 games. If they keep repeating this cycle as the season goes on, it will be a mid-table finish at the end of the campaign. So they now need to use this as a turning point and to keep producing that level of performance, rather than just letting it be a sort of high point in another transitional season. Of course, I think the patience would be there for a transitional season, and I'm not saying it would be the end of the world if this does end up being a little bit of a high point, and then there are a couple of weeks or a few games where Norwich dip off a bit and then they come back up to these levels. I think that's to be expected at times this season. But Thorup will hope and I'm sure he'll be focused on delivering this as a long-term product rather than just one high point and then it dips down to the levels that we have also seen a few weeks ago.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the positive element is that in all three of the last games, really, there's probably been different elements of what he's trying to implement at Norwich City, and in different ways. And I actually felt probably that the performance at Coventry maybe wasn't as strong as the two they produced at Carrow Road that didn't yield wins. But such is the division that they're in. It was a slightly different win with probably a bit more defensive now, but particularly that sort of 25-minute spell after half time was excellent. And you're right. I think a lot of the feeling around Thorup in particular comes from his communications, which is obviously a lot of the time that the fans will kind of see and listen to his words, and be it through our channels or elsewhere. But equally, it's a recognition of kind of the cards he's been dealt in early weeks and the early part of his Norwich reign. He's had transfer requests, players refusing to play. He's seen key players, really key players, and excellent players sold. All of that, he's probably wondered at points, what on earth he's done to upset the footballing gods at various stages to have things that have unfolded in the way that they have. But he's kind of carried himself really well through that. And of course, that doesn't mean that you pick up results, but that coupled with obviously improvement in performances. And I guess this probably comes on to my next point, Paddy, to relate all of this discussion back to yesterday's game, the proactivity, that willingness and ruthlessness probably. And we know, I think we've got the impression over the first month or so in terms of league action, we can see there is a young man who is, in terms of his own coaching journey, he's in a hurry. He's got high standards. He's not going to muck about. And that was probably encapsulated by the double change that he made at half time, which probably was the catalyst for Norwich City going on to win that game at the CBS Arena.
I think it was, Connor. And I'd have to go back and, because I tweeted it, I don't know what point it was in the first half, but it felt like it was probably midway through where he called Schwartau and Slimani away from, they were warming up quite a prolonged period along the touchline. He appeared from the dugout, brought them back, had about 30 seconds, a minute of dialogue, and then they went back to their warm-up, and then at halftime both came on. So that tells me, as I say, I can't quite remember, it was around about 20, 25 minutes in, maybe slightly longer, half an hour. He'd seen enough. And again, I don't want to keep making this, he's brilliant, David Wagner wasn't, Dean Smith wasn't, Daniel Farker wasn't, but that was the sort of things that they were hit around the head with, metaphorically, that they were not proactive in terms of they seeing a game developing, trying to wrestle it back round to their control, whether that was using subs, whether that was what they did in game, the tactical nuances of it all. This guy saw it, brought those two in, up the touchline, right, sent them away. Clearly, more or less, you would imagine now the instructions was you're coming on at half time. Got to half time, made the changes, and then Slimani more so than Schwartau, let's be honest. I thought that was a transformational change because him, McLean, Nunes took complete control of that game in terms of the tempo they were moving the ball, still trying to do what they were trying to do in the first half and the first 25 minutes, because they're never going to veer from what Thorup wants them to do in terms of progressing the ball from back to front. But it was, in many respects, it was night and day, because with Slimani in there, they had that physicality, that robustness. He took a yellow card rather than let Coventry break in stoppage time, just that streetwise edge, even though he's still a relatively young man in his career, 23, but played enough games that he knew that had to be halted at source. But on the ball, and McLean was very good, and he was integral to that as well. The way they were switching the point of attack through central areas, sucking Coventry players in, then the space and the numerical advantage was wide, and that was underlined by the goal. Jack Stacey and Akers on the overlap after a quick period of passing in the middle of the park. Borja Sainz in Akers as well, because Coventry's rest defence was a little bit frayed by that stage. So all of those elements come back for me to Thorup sees it early, decisive enough, we're changing this, and primes those two new players. And there was no, with Slimani, he only came in on Friday. How much work has he done with the group? Is it a gamble? No. He thought, this guy will be better in my midfield three in the second half than the ones who are out there. We're going to make the change. So all of that probably does underscore that this is a, maybe in many respects positively a naive coach, because if you've had a few hits and a few bruises, maybe you second guess yourself and maybe you stop before you actually
I'll just give it 20 minutes. Yeah, I'll just give it 20 minutes. I'll see how they come out.
It's almost the fear of what could happen in terms of the negative part of my decisions. So I'll sit on it. He's clearly 18 months in, fearless in that regard, and and wants to be proactive in his thoughts as well as how his team operates on the pitch and enacts those thoughts. And again, let's not get carried away, to underline Sam's point. In one 90-minute offering yesterday, his proactivity has probably won them that game of football, because there was very little between those two sides, let's be honest, over the entirety of the 90 minutes.
Yeah, and Sam, just to zoom in on Slimani a little bit, it was, and I think I mentioned on maybe a previous podcast a couple of weeks ago, how it felt like they were probably lacking a physical, different profile of midfielder. Really, they've got a lot of quite technical, good ones, and Nunez, the pass for the goal, which probably is going to be lost in this show overall. That was excellent. But in terms of his impact, you look at it in terms of pure statistical perspective. In that first half, Norwich had 49% of the ball. They had less of the ball than Coventry. In the second, that rose to 64%. Of course, that's not all down to one change, but it's the structural impact that it had. In just 45 minutes, he had more touches than 5 of Norwich City's starters. 6 recoveries he made. It was a real standout performance from somebody who, as Paddy said, in the context, had been unveiled as a Norwich player Friday night. Had very little time to get in around it. Norwich fans, I'm sure, would have been acutely aware of the sort of reviews, or I'm trying to word it a bit more politely, but some of the not particularly encouraging words that came from Sheffield United fans around him. And it was probably important for him that he had an important cameo. But yeah, the bit that stood out for me in all of that context and all of the stats is the moment that Paddy referenced, that ability where late on, Norwich are in transition. They'd lost the ball high up the pitch. Mason Clark is leading a Coventry charge. Bang, straight into him. Stop that. Halt the momentum. Take the free kick. Let Norwich reset. It was that game intelligence for me that was the most impressive thing. But equally, the differing profile that he has compared to Norwich City's other options in that area.
Yeah, I think he fits what they need. Exactly, to be honest. I think you look at what Norwich were lacking, and as you've sort of mapped out there, really, every aspect that you thought Norwich need in this midfield, he probably brought. And I know everyone wanted a sort of, or a lot of people wanted a classic, deeper holding midfielder who would sort of screen that defence and be that physical presence and make those sorts of tackles that maybe we saw from Slimani at stages yesterday. But in that Thorup system, there just isn't room for someone who is a little bit more stationary and doesn't cover as much ground as the other midfielders, doesn't contribute in possession. So you need a bit of a combination from all of the midfielders in there to create that sort of physical presence. I think you look at Marcelino Nunez, and yes, he has improved he's improved how to use his body, and he knows where to stand to contribute to that side, but he obviously doesn't bring that sort of physical profile. He won't really hold players up in that way. But I think you combine Slimani and McLean, and they've got a decent amount of that in that midfield now. But also Slimani comes with the technical ability, and I thought it was a bit of a scrappy game at times, so he didn't get to show this ability too much. But there were definitely occasions where he was turning into midfield. He was positive with his first touch. He was able to look forward and to face the opposition goal rather than spending a lot of the time dropping into midfield, facing his own defenders, just changing the angle and playing bounce passes. And I think what we've learned from the recruitment in that midfield area especially is that Norwich really want players who are able to turn on the ball and able to take it from facing their own goal to facing the opposition goal. That, to be fair to Emanuel Forson, even though he didn't have his best game yesterday, is one of the key strengths of his game. And I think Slimani brings that as well. So if you can combine that technical ability, that tactical ability, and that confidence to want to take on the ball and turn and face the opposition goal, if you can combine that with the physicality, I mean, for me, you've got close to the perfect championship midfielder. And obviously there will be players in that league who are better at taking the ball in and turning. There will be players in the league who are better at passing and players who are more physical. But I think it was really important that Norwich managed to bring it all together and to have someone in there who can do all of that a little bit. And there probably are better technical players in that team. There probably are slightly more physical players, but I don't think anyone brings it together in the same way that he does and the way that he did yesterday. And obviously there were a few times last season where some of the players who now have ended up leaving the club or aren't maybe adored by supporters too much, where they looked excellent in their first few games. So it might be early for us to say that it's a fantastic signing, but I think, as you said, it was important for him to start well, especially considering some of the noises around him from Sheffield United fans and sort of the game time that he had there. But as someone said who I was speaking to on our Spaces post-match yesterday, sort of systems make players. And there are so many great players who will be in the wrong system who really won't work and you won't get the best out of them. I think that, to me, increasingly feels like the case was for Slimani at Sheffield United. And I don't think he's been in the same type of model that he's thrived on at Brøndby and hopefully will thrive on at Norwich. But I thought in the short term, it was an inspired change from Thorup. And in the long term, I think that will give him a huge boost in terms of his reputation with supporters, them giving him a bit more time. And also just in terms of his confidence, it was important for him to start well. So, encouraging on all fronts, really.
Yeah, Norwich's oldest summer signing, actually, a matter of months between him and Cordoba. But you look actually at some of those reviews from Sheffield United fans, and equally, I'm sure there are some Norwich players you mentioned who have left recently and gone on to flourish elsewhere. But this is a guy who's at 23 has played Premier League football. He's a Danish champion. He's played in the World Cup. He's capped over 30 times by Tunisia. He's a guy who should and does have decent pedigree. And I looked into it this morning actually, and I think of the 15 times he played for Sheffield United last year in the Premier League, a team that got 16 points, won only 3 games. It's a difficult environment for any player to walk into, let alone as his first kind of experience of English football. He only started 4 times in the Premier League last season, and it's difficult in sort of any environment to make an impact in that sense. But equally, I think for Thorup, and we mentioned this I think a few weeks ago, sometimes you need those players that you can drop in at moments, particularly when you're in transition. You're trying to get the dressing room to come around to your way of thinking. You're trying to implement a new style of play. You need these players who, okay, they haven't directly worked for him before, but they're familiar in terms of what he wants to do, how he wants to play. And I think the fact that both of them, both relatively new to the club, were thrown in and made a pretty decent impact is probably a sign that actually they're 2 guys there that maybe he will come to trust as well in the coming weeks. And Paddy, just on the Slimani pursuit in terms of transfer more widely, it did feel, I think, for definitely the last month or so, like a straight shootout for that midfield spot. Norwich were either going to sign Anis Ben Slimani from Sheffield United, or they were going to go for Renier at Real Madrid. In the end, they've gone for Slimani. Just talk to us a little bit about that pursuit, because I think at various times on social media, Renier was a Norwich player, and I think people had put him into kits and various different things, which is great, and supporters are allowed to get carried away. And obviously, a Real Madrid player being linked with Norwich City, I think, is incredibly exciting for anyone. I can understand why there was such a buzz around that, but I think it's important to illustrate that even though Norwich could have signed Renier, they opted to go for Slimani, and I think that is probably a sign of just how highly they rate him, but equally of that point that Sam was making there in terms of how they see him fitting into Johannes Hoff Thorup's system more widely.
I mean, exactly that. In regard of one or the other, yeah, it was one or the other. And what tipped the balance was Thorup primarily. I'm sure his coaches, Ben Napper, Neil Adams, decided that once Slimani, there was a chance to get him, that he was a better profile of midfielder for what he needs. Renier, I think it's safe to say, is more of an attacking midfielder. If you want to put numbers on it, maybe more of an 8-10, whereas this guy's clearly more of a 6-8 in terms of the numbers that you would associate where they play in midfield. So that tipped the balance, and that was all that tipped the balance. Just to clarify, I know there was a lot of talk about the sticking points around buy clauses and any potential loan with the Brazilian lad. That wasn't the case. I was told on deadline night that basically, well, probably his mum, given she started following Norwich on social, but certainly his camp more broadly, Real Madrid were desperate to get him to Norwich. The player was desperate to come to Norwich, to the point where they would have facilitated the finances. Madrid would have, if not all the wages, the majority of those wages would have covered him off, just to get him into a different environment. Maybe England's a better shop window in that regard as well, because he's clearly not going to feature at Real Madrid now. You can see his career path since he came over from Flamenco for a lot of money, €30 million. Had loans at Dortmund and 1 or 2 other clubs. Italy, he was in Serie A last season, but obviously not a Real Madrid player now in the future. So they need to try and recoup some money, and maybe England was seen as a better market. But park all that. No, the reason he's not in Norwich now is simply because once Slimani was an option, he fitted Thorup's eye better than Rainier, really. And for everything that Sam just said in the previous segment, that underlines very much that there's a commonality in the recruitment. There's a strategic vision, and they're not going to do something off the Real Madrid. Oh my God, a Brazilian from Real Madrid, we've got to get him in. Dare I say, a Brazilian from Arsenal didn't do a lot last season called Marquinhos. So, buyer beware or loaner beware on that. No, this is very much, is this player right for us? Does he fit what we need? Will he add to what we've got? Will he improve what we've got? If not, see you later. And very much in this example, that's why it pivoted from Rainier to Slimani.
Yeah, I think that's interesting context to provide. And moving back to the game, and we spoke about his tackle, which was definitely on the illegal front. If we talk about a legal one, which I think Paddy has wound Mark Robins up quite substantially, it's the one from Callum Doyle on Sakamoto. I mean, I've at the time, and I've watched it back. Brilliant tackle. Don't see any issue with it. I don't see how he's left anything on the lad. I think if anything, it's the landing of Sakamoto. He's unfortunate with that, if we're honest, and the way that he sort of jumped to avoid contact, and it's the way that he's landed. I've seen a few people say that Doyle slightly raised his knee. I think we're being ridiculous, really, if we're looking at that. It was a forceful. It was a fair challenge. Can you understand why it's rubbed Mark Robins up the wrong way? Has it rubbed you up the wrong way as somebody of a Coventry persuasion?
No, definitely not with any Coventry persuasion on it. No, I mean, I don't know whether that's, I've seen one or two saying, is this a distraction tactic from Mark? Because his team didn't play very well second half, and when we're all talking maybe, or the Coventry fans are talking more about, worth pointing out, Callum Doyle was a Coventry loanee, very good loanee for Coventry, helped them get to the playoff final 2 seasons ago now. So no, because in between there and less, and I think it was more that. I think you have to be mindful. Don't just zero in on that one tackle at that point of the first half. Look at the broader context of who was making the tackle, because there was one or two instances where he was almost trying to, not saying he was trying to rile up the crowd, but the crowd were getting riled up by him, and there was his body language felt quite combative at times. When he maybe pulled off a tackle, he was chest out, staring down the fan base. There was more one that I thought was justifiably maybe he left a bit on. I can't remember who the player was. Even the second half, it was right in the far corner near the corner flag, where he did seem to, go in with feeling, should we say? But not that one. No, that was just a very robust challenge. But of course, the climate of football now, compared to when Mark Robins was donning the Norwich shirt, is remarkable. Well, dramatically different, and that's why those type of challenges, you're getting into the reeds of, is he in control? His feet are off the ground. Rah, is his foot up? And so you can see why there's been a debate fueled, obviously, now by those comments from Mark Robins. But also, again, we're zooming out. There's context here in terms of the comments were delivered around, well, they've done it again, Norwich, because they crocked him last season when at Carrow Road, if you remember, how he'd been targeted. I think he used the words, almost as if it was a mission to get Sakamoto. I think there was a challenge Nunes did in midfield. He might have got booked that day. And so I think it pays to not get too hung up on one challenge from one player on another. It's more the context you wrap around that, which I've just mapped out there. But, Darren Huckaby's ex was quite entertaining last night, who played in the era of Mark Robins and a little bit later, and he couldn't really see what the fuss was about. So, I think I'll be surprised if Mark Robins really felt that was a challenge which was worthy of, heinous punishment. I think it was just a very robust, very strong challenge. And it's unfortunate. I think that's the element. And maybe a lot of this was frustration that he lost that player last season against Norwich. It feels like he's going to lose him again because he left the ground in a protective boot. Obviously, now they'll be in that cycle of letting it settle down for a day or two and then assessing it. So maybe it's a fear. And it was also came in a press conference where he spent quite a lot of time talking about a little bit of a transfer window frustration, and that they went for one player on deadline day. They didn't get him. They lost Casey Palmer to Hull. He didn't really want to lose him, but there was a contractual thing going on there. Wasn't happy maybe with the role of the agent in that scenario. So all of that wrapped around potentially now losing a key attacking player for them for a length of time. I think it probably just all came together in his outburst, to put it mildly. But No, I mean, if you can strip all, if it is possible to strip all out of the way and just look at that challenge, hard, but for me, didn't tip over into, that needed sanctioning. Callum Dore needed sanctioning. That was symptomatic of Norwich targeting the player, because I don't remember any other tackle on Sakamoto that would indicate that was a concerted campaign and that Thorup had almost sent them out with that "get Sakamoto" message. That clearly wasn't the case. So yeah, as I say, a lot going on there, a lot to unpack in those comments. But I would be inclined to agree with Hooks. I think that just in terms of the challenge, while you can understand the outcome and why the frustration might be there on the Coventry side, I don't think the challenge was a malicious to-do attempt from Callum Doyle.
Yeah, Darren Huckabee's X account is usually an entertaining place by and large. Yeah, you definitely get honesty from him on all fronts, which is great. Sam, Callum Doyle more generally though, I think it's pretty clear to see that Norwich fans have taken to him. There was I don't know if it was a new chant, but there was a chant for him yesterday, which I certainly hadn't heard before. I think increasingly you're looking at him as a player. I know we spoke about him last week, so I don't want to keep hammering home the point, but he keeps being very good. So it's hard not to speak about him. I think it is increasingly hard to watch him. And I know he had obviously a major injury at Leicester. Maybe therein is the answer. But increasingly watching him both as a centre-back and probably as a left-back as well, you're probably scratching your head a little bit and going, how isn't this guy playing in the Premier League?
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. And I think we had a bit of a conversation about it yesterday as well, that it just doesn't really make sense with what he's achieved as well. Not only in the Championship with Coventry and Leicester, but also even when he was, I think, 17 or 18, getting promoted out of League One. This guy has all the credentials to be playing at a higher level. I suppose there is a bit more focus in that league, and this played a bit into the sort of interest in Gabriel Sara and the fees that clubs were willing to pay for him. There is a bit of added interest in sort of pace and physicality, and we have spoken a bit about maybe the fact that he can't defend in behind as well as some of his peers and doesn't have that athleticism to track back with pace. But yeah, it doesn't really seem to make much sense that there were no Premier League clubs in for him. But I suppose you also have to look at Manchester City and what they're looking at long term. And I think this Norwich setup, especially with how Thorup goes about things in defence, probably is a little bit similar to Pep Guardiola and that system that they like to utilise, especially that inverted sort of left back role, which is one that Guardiola has used pretty infamously or famously throughout his career with Manchester City and continues to use fairly often. It was also a similar role that Doyle played under Maresca at Leicester. So I don't know if there is a bit of added focus from them on trying to get him more experience in that system. But regardless, it feels like Norwich have pulled off a fantastic signing here. And as we've said a few times, after some very good performances, it probably justifies that decision to wait and some of the frustration that there was over how long it was taking to get that deal over the line. But I remember us saying to each other before that actually got confirmed that he looked like the perfect player to fit what Thorup was going to come in and try to do at Norwich. And I think there's increasing evidence of that week in, week out. I think the positional element is one that's getting more and more interesting because he looks more and more like a centre-back. Ben Krezene also had, I thought, by far his best appearance in a Norwich shirt yesterday. But Jose Cordoba is somebody they absolutely love behind the scenes. And also it doesn't feel like there's that much pace in that central defensive partnership if they do end up facing a striker in the next few weeks who wants to sort of run in behind and wants to test them with movement. So I think it's becoming an interesting tactical choice for Thorup to make. But right now, whatever position he's playing in, it feels like you need to accommodate Callum Doyle, because what a signing he looks, and as long as he can stay injury free this season, I think he'll be one who Norwich fans are absolutely desperate to keep, however unrealistic that looks by the time that he's got to the end of the season, and hopefully put in 40 more of these very, very good performances.
Yep, absolutely. He's been excellent so far. Thought it was interesting actually, and I know we referenced this on the team news video, that Thorup kind of spoke about the fact that he would play two left-footed centre backs together. I think that's maybe an interesting concept, and what that would need to do in terms of right back, because I think then you would have to probably invert the right back to have that sort of right-sided option, and maybe go out the other way. But I think it's an interesting concept that he's at least willing to rule it out as an option. I think we should add as well at this point that Shane Duffy in the last two games, I think, has done very, very well after what was some very early season criticism. He's particularly the last two games, I think he's been very, very good for Norwich in both games, probably quite quietly, and maybe hasn't got quite a lot of credit. But there's one moment where he got caught out by Hadji Wright yesterday where he got in behind. But beyond that, I thought he's been very, very solid, and probably one of these players that actually his level has been raised by having Doyle alongside him. Paddy, let's and I'll put you both on notice. I'm going to ask you both in a moment for a grade on Norwich City's transfer window. So just have a little think about that. But Paddy, first and foremost, let's cover off deadline day. As we mentioned, Slimani came in. He was one of two additions for Norwich City. Cade Gordon on loan from Liverpool was another interesting kind of loan signing. Teenager, very highly rated, had a few injury problems at Liverpool, made his senior debut at Carrow Road in a cup game. First and foremost on him, as much as we spoke about Slimani being a slightly different profile of player to what they've got, it sounds like Thorup is viewing him quite similarly, that he's a very different type of wide player to maybe the ones that they have in the building at the moment. Yeah,
exactly. And you can break that down as somebody who likes to get the ball and dribble, to use the old parlance. A little bit like, I think his answer yesterday to me was almost the right-sided version of Sainz, that you can have two of those now, that against the suitable opponent with the suitable spaces in the final third, it might take that type of profile, as opposed to what he felt he had probably too many of in those wide areas, was maybe just out-and-out runners, maybe almost players like Cernach who can operate centrally, more of a striker, hybrid striker winger. This guy is very much a winger, and maybe an old-school winger in that regard, if he wants to try and beat players and use his pace and his trickery. So it's all about options, and the word we heard a lot through through transfer window, second part anyway, was versatility, that the players they're targeting, and we've just come off a segment about Callum Doyle being a left-sided left-back, left centre-back. So that rings true of midfield and forward areas, that they want that variety, because the Championship isn't the same opponent week in, week out. You get different challenges, different tests, and the more options he's got at his disposal, the better set up Norwich can be to counteract what any given opponent's going to do. So, yeah, that was very much one, I think. I mean, obviously in the morning of, once the Kamara thing started to move and it was clear that there was a deal to be done there, I think they'd still like to have done a permanent, but, as the day has progressed, we saw that they were in for the likes of Matondo and Raksaki they looked at, and there was links to Jaden Anthony as well, that how difficult it might have proven to try and get a permanent over the line in the final hours. So we'll wait and see. I've already referenced him. I'm a bit scarred by the Marquinhos thing, because when he signed, everybody thought he was going to be the best thing since sliced bread, and it didn't quite prove that the case given his pedigree. But this lad, if he's through his fitness issues, then you would think at Championship level he would have more than enough quality to make a difference.
I always wonder what came before that saying. What was the best thing before sliced bread? That's what I always wonder about. But we're going in a different podcast anyway. Altogether there. The outgoing, as you mentioned, Abu Kamara got his dream move to Hull, and maybe becomes the first person in history to go to Hull by choice. That's a joke. I'm joking. Please let me in later in the season. But it's going to be really interesting to see how he gets on after forcing that move through. And I think he's obviously a player that Norwich didn't want to sell, but obviously has maybe forced their hand a little bit. So it's a sad ending from him after a long association at Norwich. But we'll be interesting to see how he gets on. Sam, right, kick us off. Transfer window closed, done. We can all catch up on more sleep. Let's have a grade. Obviously, A star being phenomenal. None of this numbers that they've brought in at like GCSE level, because I don't understand them. But A star being the best, and you being the worst. Where do you grade Norwich's transfer window business?
Yeah, it's a shame you've ruled out numbers there, because my GCSEs were done in numbers and they were quite good, and my A levels were done in letters and they were terrible. So bit of PTSD for me there. But no, I think I'm gonna go B- at the moment. I think it's always difficult to judge a transfer window before you've really seen those players in those shirts, because I think we were all looking at that transfer window in 2021, and everyone was looking at that list of names thinking what a masterclass Stuart Webber had pulled off in that summer. And then obviously it ended up being pretty much the reason why they mounted very little challenge to stay in the Premier League. So ever since that experience and having my fingers burned by getting similarly excited by that window, I think it's best to wait for a bit of time before you get too excited about players. But I think we can look at patterns. We can look at how well Ben Napper has completed the objectives that he set for himself going into the window. And, you know, you look at the number of young players that they've brought in, the fact that they haven't signed anyone aged over 23. They've added significantly to the number of players who feel suited to Johannes Hoff Thorup's system. I think you have to view it broadly as a success, and the quality with which they fulfill those objectives that Thorup is going to set in his setup will decide ultimately how good the business was. And I think there are already looking like certain players who might shine more than others, but you know, we're very, very early in the process. I think we'll learn a lot more, but I think you can take a lot from the patterns of players that they've brought in, and overall Ben Napper has delivered exactly what he said he would, and I think it is encouraging going forward with him at the helm.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I would probably grade it around a B in terms of them achieving their objectives, obviously getting money for players, shifting on players that didn't want to be here as well into that context. I think all of that probably feels like at this moment, and like you say, you always have to let these things breathe and blood a little bit. But as we sit here 48 hours or so after the transfer window closing, it does feel probably more positive than negative. Paddy, where would you grade it?
Slightly more positive than you two boys. I'm going B+, and mainly because for the reasons you both pointed out, you can't really judge from a footballing perspective at this point because they're just in the building. They haven't really played a significant block of time. We don't know if they are going to elevate Norwich on the pitch, so that is a little bit jury's out. But for me, it's look at how they dragged Celtic to script. Kicking and screaming to 8.5 mil.
We've got him.
You've got me.
Sorry, we lost you momentarily.
Okay, yeah.
It's obviously the farm air.
That'll be it. Yeah. See my lad anywhere around here, he's probably cut the wires or something like that. But B, I'll just repeat a little bit. B+ based on the fact that they took Celtic kicking and screaming all through the window to 8.5 mil. That was very, very more inflated than where Celtic were at the start of the window. Ditto Johnny Rowe. Marseille had to come back with numerous bids. Even Kamara, Hull were not getting him out of the building unless they got it to a level which, by common consent, I think most fans would agree that is very good negotiating from Napper and his team. So, and even Zara, I know there was a bit of conjecture about what have they banked up front, could it translate to put it mildly. But even that, if that's getting up around 22 million down the track, is for me probably where he was at that stage as a very good championship player, but still unproven in a top European league. That was good business. So for me, the way they've negotiated, I would give it a B+. But obviously, I'm coming at it. I've gone a bit, boardroom here and looking at it from the numbers on the balance sheet rather than what actually the players who've come in are going to produce on the pitch. So, maybe we'll have to do this segment again just before the January window opens when we've got a huge body of evidence on the pitch to say that these players have actually replaced a lot of the ones I've just talked about have really also, as well as the financial element, have really lifted Norwich in terms of on the football pitch.
No, I think that's probably the right way to look at it at this stage, and that's mainly really because as both you guys highlighted, with the lack of sort of football data available, that's probably the best way to look at it. So it'd be interesting for obviously you guys listening and watching as well to let us know your sort of grades for Norwich City's transfer window business. You can obviously let us go in the comments or contact us on social media or any of that sort of stuff, and it'd be interesting to see what you make of it. I just wanted to highlight. At the end, there was a really interesting moment post game where obviously amid the fans had exited and I think Thorup was about halfway through his interview with BBC Radio Norfolk's Chris Gorham, and Ben Napper and Neil Adams came down from wherever they were, the director's lounge, to the side of the pitch. And as Chris said to me post game, there certainly wasn't many, if any, times we saw that last season. Ben Napper and Neil Adams coming down pitch sides for what was a really big embrace, particularly with Glenn Riddlesholme, but Thorup as well, and the four of them just sort of chewing the fat off the game. And I think they were raving about Nunez's pass for the goal. Actually, I think that's what they were talking about. It was a pass anyway, but just the general performance. And I felt that was a really interesting moment, given the context of last season. But I guess finally, Pad, all there is to say really, and it's the question I'm sure most people will be asking, which is when do you start
Connor. Sorry, Connor. The line's about to go here, mate. I'm going to have to bail out, mate. Sorry.
They want to know, you're obviously on a farm, and you've gone big time now. When do you start your role of James Bond?
Yeah. To be fair, the Mafia lines, somebody called me Don Paddy Davitio or something like that on X I saw, which I thought, I could actually see the Mafia mobster kind of look with that big old shades.
You've got to keep wearing them now, haven't you? Because Norwich have won, so the superstitious will be wanting to see them again.
No. If we get to those levels, then I'd really fear for Norwich's prospects this season if it's down to my attire. But no, well, as you well know, as you were sat next to me, Connor, it was an incredibly blazing sun appeared over the back of the CBS, and I was more ruining that I did have my cap on the kitchen table to bring with me and left it there for some strange reason. So that would have gone on. Wouldn't have needed the shades. But as I had the shades in the bag, I thought, well, I better get them on. On reflection, I probably won't be doing that again.
And for context as well, where the press area, I don't know if it's like, the best I can describe it is they're like laminated. So when the sun comes, it really beats off them. And I couldn't really see the screen, but I could see enough of it to see the comments that you were getting, which is quite amusing and off-putting.
Connor, we're in the entertainment business. If it's not what we say but how we look, then so be it. I don't mind. I'm not precious about these things, but it's when people are no longer consuming the content is the time we need to worry. If they're consuming it because we're making ourselves look a bit silly, then so be it.
Of course, I think that we'll develop like the game Buckaroo, and we'll just add a hat to you and like an earring at various stages of the season, just build you up gradually. That seems like the best way to go. But anyway, we digress. That seems like an apt place to end the podcast. Paddy, Sam, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you all very much for watching and listening on whichever platform you have watched, and of course we'll be doing these every week throughout the championship season, so make sure you keep tuned, subscribe to the YouTube and the podcast players and all of that good stuff. PinkUn.com as well, the place to go for all of our other coverage of Norwich City's championship campaign. But for now, as we head into the international break with smiles on faces, very good vibes, Norwich City well and truly off and running in the championship. See you soon.